well, this is the outcome of it. It's got some particularly good scenery of Vesuvius. There you go, sit on cue. All right, continuing on the sort of Christmas quiz theme. Pompeii's obviously not in Britain. It is a module about the British landscape. There is one active volcano in Her Majesty's Rail. Any bids? It's obviously not on the mainland of Britain. Yep.
Montserrat.
Excellent, Montserrat. The only active volcano that Her Majesty is not personally responsible for, but it's kind of her. Good stuff. The aim of today is to try and take, and I'll put this in a minute, is to try and take some of the things you've been learning in this module and begin the process of showing you how they're used in engineering terms. I'm going to say this again at the end, but this is part of a twin of lectures. The other one is on the environmental geology aspects, and that's going to be held this time next week. Okay, so hopefully you've got the changing schedule from Matt Jones. So today, engineering geology, a week today, environmental geology. Right, enough deployed. It's on YouTube, so if you want to delight and educate yourselves, you can. But that's what we're talking about this morning, the engineering geology being the way that the ground impacts on us. Now, how many of you were at the hydrogeology lecture on Friday? Okay. For some reason, I can't upload stuff onto WebCT for that module, so you were all emailed the presentation on Friday through your WebCT emails. Did anybody find it through a WebCT email? Excellent, you got through. Superb. Bizarrely, that email doesn't come through to your main Nottingham account. You're actually going to go onto WebCT and look for it. These slides are already on WebCT, so if you're into following slides and so on, these are already on there, so there we go. Okay. My aim today is to begin to give you an awareness of how the landscape affects and is affected by our activities. And today I'm going to focus on how the science that you've been learning about during the course of this module is then interpreted by engineering geologists for use by ground engineers, civil engineers, tunnellers and so on, and by planners. Planning is obviously a very hot topic at the moment because the government's proposed changes to the planning guidance through the draft National Planning Policy Framework. And you may have seen in the news and read in the newspapers the storm that has created, with directors of the National Trust and CPRE and others coming out very strongly to criticise the government for its proposed changes. And if you want to find out a bit more about that, and you're free at 1 o'clock this afternoon, then one of the research groups in the School Environment and Society is running a seminar from 1 till 2 in A31, the small seminar room along the corridor, and you'd be more than welcome to come along and find out about how some of the ramifications of those proposed changes are working out in practice, with particular reference to a site not far from here in Derbyshire. We'll come on to the Glossop lectures in a minute, but knowing that you are all keen readers, the number of emails I got over the weekend, because people couldn't find the hydrogeology PowerPoint, was actually quite touching. So if you're going to do no other reading than one thing, then I suggest you look at Peter Fuchs's paper, 1997, on the geological model, prediction and performance. It's a massive paper. It's 131 pages long. Just one academic paper takes up an entire issue of a particular journal. I'll come back onto the Glossop lecturers in a bit. And if you want a slightly more readable kind of A-level geology level book on the relevance of geology to contamination, then the chapter in a book that myself and Paul Bardos wrote, and there's a copy of it down in the Edwards Resource Centre, And I'm led to understand you can also get the electronic version through the university online library. Is worth looking at. July 1969, as a 5-year-old, gives you an idea of how old I am, my father woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning and plonked me in my dressing gown on the floor in front of a very flickery black and white screen. And he said, "You're going to remember this." I remember these vague, fuzzy black and white images, and I remember thinking, why am I up at 2 o'clock in the morning, but I'm not going to complain, because normally I'm not allowed to be up after about 9. This is the exchange between Aldrin and Armstrong as the lunar landing takes place. You know the controversial statement from Neil Armstrong. There's been oodles of speculation at the bottom there. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And Armstrong's been criticised for bigging himself up because obviously he's the man. And Armstrong maintained that he did say for a man, but that the sound quality wasn't good enough to pick up that single letter. It's amazing what people worry about. But the interesting thing is that having said this famous quote, the next thing that Armstrong does, or the next thing that he says, is he gives an engineering description of what the surface is like. The surface is fine and powdery. Describes its consistency, its texture. He says, I can kick it up loosely with my toe. Then talks about its cohesion. It does adhere in fine layers, like powdered charcoal, to the sole and sides of my boots. I only go in a fraction of an inch. He's talking about the compressibility of the stuff that he's standing on. Maybe an eighth of an inch. But I can see the footprints of my boots and the treads in the fine sandy particles. So we're seeing a particle size distribution here as well. So the first thing that man says on the moon is how fantastic man is. And the second thing that man says on the moon is what the surface is like in terms of its performance, its physical characteristics. And engineering geology is much more about how materials behave than their history, their age, their fossil composition, or anything else. Much of that, being very honest, is a total distraction. We're very reductionist in the engineering geology world. We want to know things like how strong is the ground, how compressible is it, how permeable is it, how long will those characteristics last, how durable is the material. Whether it's 5 million, 500 million, 5 billion, 500 billion years old, who cares? Now, interestingly, this was Armstrong's factual description. Objective, reproducible, etc. You see a picture of his footprint in the top right. The next thing he goes on to do is to give an interpretation in terms of trafficability. There seems to be no difficulty in move around as we suspected. It's even perhaps easier than the simulations of 1/6 G that we performed on the ground. It's absolutely no trouble to walk around. And then he looks underneath his landing module. The descent engine didn't leave a crater of any size. There's about 1 foot clearance on the ground. We're essentially on a level place here, and I can see some evidence of rays emanating from the descent engine, but a very insignificant amount. So he's looked at the ground, he's described it, and then he's interpreted it. He's answered a so what, in this case, about trafficability. And if you go back into the history of engineering geology, you will realise that one of the uses of it is the ability of vehicles to move over ground, be they military tanks, or tractors, or construction vehicles. It doesn't matter to us the mineralogy of the soil, or its moisture content, or its provenance. Actually, what matters is, will your tractor get bogged down or not? The profession of engineering geology in this country is looked after on